Finally, some good 2D Mario bosses again. I never thought they'd actually go back and address this issue, but they did. So Super Mario Bros. Wonder just got its Nintendo Switch 2 edition released a couple of days ago, and with it came new boss battles as part of a new smaller side story campaign. And unlike the slop from the base game, oh yeah, this is much more like it. For as much as Super Mario Bros. Wonder was always a great game from the start, I don't think anyone would disagree that the boss fights were a massive step down from not just the rest of the game, but even compared to previous 2D Marios. It honest to god felt like the developers just looked at the hate the Koopalings got in the 2010s, and using their brilliant deductive skills, figured it was not the fact that their boss fights were generic that was the problem, but rather the characters themselves. And so they just replaced them with Bowser Jr. as if that would magically fix the issue. It's actually shocking how little they made use of the titular Wonder gimmick at all from a gameplay standpoint, especially when they reportedly had no deadline for the game, and had all the time in the world to come up with something cool. I mean seriously, as a child, boss fights were always some of the biggest highlights in games I played, and I figured they were for many as well. How are they not a higher priority in this game? However, it seems like they finally came to their senses about what the fundamental problem always was, with these new fights being not only some of the most innovative overall in 2D Mario, making all sorts of insane uses of Mario Wonder's mechanics, but also proving that the Koopalings too can shine as bosses when given the time and effort. Truthfully, they should have been here from the start, but hey, this is better than nothing, and so with all of these new battles, I figured it could finally be time to make a definitive ranking of all the boss battles in the full Super Mario Bros. Wonder game. I suspect people are long gonna discuss which of the new Koopaling fights are the best of the best, and I figure it could be fun to add my 2 cents as well to this discussion as a result. Plus it also gives me an excuse to rant about the main game boss fights again, and so with all that being said, I say let's waste no more time and just get started already. So, most people probably think the Mecha Makers are the worst bosses here, right? Well, those people are wrong! It's the Koopalings!
Didn't you just talk about how amazing they are, though?
Okay, allow me to explain. Yes, individually, each of the Koopaling fights are some of the coolest ever in this series. However, when you first enter Bellabel Park, you also first battle them as a collective, as a sort of warm-up, and it's honestly the worst boss fight I've ever played in a Mario game. Unless we're including spin-offs. It is literally just a tutorial for the new flower pot item. You fire a bunch of flowers at their clown car flying around, and that's literally it. They don't attack you, heck, you can't even take damage if you wanted to, you just bounce back if you accidentally touch their helicopter. I guess it's like that so you won't lose your power-up, which is the only way you can defeat them, but like, couldn't they just have had that bird come in and help you in that case? It's honestly pathetic how mindless it is, and it completely killed my expectations for the rest of the fights initially. It's hard to really be mad at it, I definitely don't feel as much vitriolic disappointment with it as I do with the base game bosses. At worst, it's just an unfulfilling prologue that doesn't take away from the other fights, but also, I can't say in good conscience that I had any sort of fun with it to put it anywhere other than last. At least everything else had the tiniest semblance of danger. So for these next 3 boss fights, I figured I might as well group them all under one segment, since this is where every single Mecha Maker battle goes. Now you might say, the Mario Wiki doesn't consider them to be actual bosses, but also, the game clearly builds them up as the big showdown at the end of the airship stages. So I think it's only fair for this list. And what a showdown they were, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't change my feelings on them. They're utter dog shit. After all that foreboding preparation on the battleship levels, why oh why is the last hurdle just a short run with a kill switch at the end? Yeah, there's a few enemies in the way, but not so many you can't just effortlessly breeze through them. It's actually embarrassing that this is the best thing they could come up with. It doesn't even work as a reference to the original Super Mario Bros. Boss fights, at least those had actual attacks to avoid. At best, the last Mecha Maker is maybe a slight step above the other 2, since you first need to dial down the fire in the way to get through, but even then the only time I struggled with it was when I was using my feet. Just what a goddamn waste of development time. They should have never been on the table to begin with. Alright, so here's the thing about Bowser Jr. in Super Mario Bros. Wonder. In a vacuum, his boss fights aren't bad. Compared to the slop we just talked about, he is a serviceable enough hurdle in your way where you do actually need to pay attention to what's happening, and the battles themselves do make the tiniest use of wonder effects to somewhat spice them up. The key word here is serviceable though, they're still completely basic in ideas, music and difficulty. In a nutshell, they're just the new Soup Koopaling fights, except without the personality they at least bring. Heck, the very first Bowser Jr. fight is probably even easier than Larry Koopa in New Super Wii, just because you get so much time to process before it actually does anything, and the size changes between phases is completely pointless. And the second fight isn't much better, you just have shifting platforms now, and when they heat up, Bowser Jr. can travel through them. To give credit where credit is due, the last two fights could actually be B tier on a good day, since they do actually play around with fairly engaging gimmicks, whether it be floating water bubbles over spikes or clones hiding as shadows. However, at the end of the day, all of it still feels trite and like it's been done before, besides maybe the water one, so it's hard to care about any of them. They don't feel dangerous or climactic enough to be the bosses concluding entire worlds. At best, they could have been alright for the mid-world airships, while the Koopalings or something else ended each world, but oh well. In the end, I hate the wasted opportunity more than I hate the actual fights themselves. They're just fine. Oh wow, what a surprise! Literally none of the base game bosses ended up above any of the individual Koopalings. Now, of the original 3 Super Mario Bros. Wonder boss fights, the final one, Bowser, is the only one I could comfortably call at least good. However, even that take doesn't come without resentment. For a battle in and of itself, it's pretty kick-ass. It's the only fight in the game with the remotest semblance of a presentation, taking place on this absolutely banging concert stage, and the way it incorporates the catchy as heck boss theme into the gameplay is pretty cool to say the least, where you need to jump in tune to the beat to launch yourself up and conquer Bowser's chin. I did not just reference The Last Airbender, but yeah, it kinda slaps. It's also really easy though. Pretty much all of the projectiles are easy as heck to avoid, and the only guard against Bowser's chin switch is sometimes a smoke hand you can just easily destroy. Here's the thing, this is the final boss of the game, and for as much as it gets a bit of a chuckle from me, it doesn't bear to mention just how simple it fundamentally is at its core for one. It really doesn't feel like a final test of skills at all. Heck, the gimmick itself for it isn't even used outside of one optional level in Sun-Baked Desert. If this were a mid-game fight you fought during, say, the end of that world, on top of the giant fortress, then it would be a good boss fight, albeit painfully straightforward, as much as it would also be a good halfway point of the game, to get you in the mood for what's to come next. Now it's a good boss, but a pretty bad final one, especially since they didn't even give us a proper second phase for it. I do like it, but man does it feel like it ends way too soon. Even just an escape sequence after defeating him would have been fine. But no, he's just wasted. Finally, we've come to the point you all clicked this video for. Before I talk about any of the Koopaling battles, I should first clarify that when talking about these, I will specifically be referring to their buffed up rematches you could find as missions. They're pretty much the exact same, except harder and more faster paced, and that context is really important in making them feel truly as dynamic as they are. Perhaps most importantly for Wendy Koopa, who is the first and simplest of the 7. But don't let that lower your expectations. Oh no, this is one of the most fun first bosses I've ever played in Mario. The gameplay loop is simple, Wendy just flies across these portals that spawn on the arena, while being a giant fat fish. However, exactly where the portals will spawn is always random, and the speed at which she flies past is quite fast to say the least, which makes spotting them quickly and nailing a hit feel all the more satisfying to pull off, especially when she's way above you and you need to use the flower pot flutter jump. I do think the last phase where she just hops around is a little bit too easy, however the satisfaction of outmaneuvering her is still somewhat there. And even the cheap-cheeps that jump in mid-phase can be hard to avoid if you don't act quick. Do I realistically think this deserves anything above B tier? Probably not, but while it does suffer from first boss syndrome in a technical sense, it does not suffer anymore because of it, and it's a wonderful start to this boss selection. And I mean, just look at how stupid she looks, it's adorable. So 3 years ago, before Super Mario Bros. Wonder first came out, and I were crushed by the truth of its bosses, one of my initial predictions for it was that for Sun-Baked Desert, you would fight against an evil genie, perhaps on the rooftops of its giant fortress as the boss fight. I've kept that wish since then, and
2,000 years later.
What the f***? This actually came true? I mean, okay, it wasn't quite like what I expected, but I don't even care. You have no idea how ecstatic I was to see Roy Koopa turn into a genie, haunting a deserted shipwreck. And I was all but prepared for my inevitably favorite fight ever. Although, then I actually finished it, and while I definitely enjoyed it, it was definitely not quite as deep as I'd wish. Out of all the new boss fights, this is definitely the least innovative one, with the bulk of it just revolving around you grabbing this photon gun and then shooting light bulbs at him in the background. It reminds me a bit of that mechanic from Kirby Triple Deluxe, except this time, the gun doesn't ever even seem to run out of ammo, except when you're done with a phase. And oftentimes you don't even need to stand on the platforms to reach it, which definitely cheapens it out a bit. But This is also where the fight makes up for it by spamming so many fish bones, boos, and fireballs that you need to constantly move out of your way from, which greatly makes this fight dynamic in its own right nevertheless. There is so much you need to avoid that at least purely on an atmospheric level, this is definitely the most chaotic feeling boss fight. And for what it's worth, the charm from Roy's design, as well as the shade-wearing boos, is absolutely top-notch. It might still be my favorite fight if we're at least just facing vibes. And there's even a fun mid-phase section where Roy will slam down his entire ship onto the ground, and you need to find the openings. So yeah, while this is definitely one of the weaker fights technically, I have a soft spot for it, unlike anything else in my heart at least. Now, Morton Koopa Jr. on the other hand is a boss fight whom I wasn't too enamored with the first few times I'd go at them, but the more I try it, starts to shine through as one of the most satisfying Koopaling battles to master. Pacing wise, it's definitely one of the bosses that can go on for a little too long if you're not paying full attention to everything happening. However, I would argue that it's its biggest weakness as much as its main strength as well. Design-wise, he probably got the short end of the stick among all the Koopalings. His Wonder form looks just about the same as his regular look, just with another color palette. However, the idea itself behind it is pretty neat. Being a marionette doll, you need to pull the strings off, and the only way to reach them being by flying up from the impact of his fist slamming into the ground. And it's a lot more strategic than you'd think. See, his strings are really high up, and unless you're already standing on one of these crates, whenever you fly up, you're probably not gonna reach them. However, the crates themselves are also easily destroyed by Morton if he crushes them, so you need to not only first lead him away, but then also quickly get up on a box to have a chance. And it's such a tense cat and mouse chase that's so fun to come out on top of. Overall, I still don't quite love it. It can get so chaotic that it's easy to self-sabotage a lot, and nobody likes feeling like they're wasting time. Seriously, it is really easy to fall in love in the latter phases. However, the better you get at it, the less it becomes an issue overall. It's definitely one of the fights that encourage you the most to experiment with different badge effects to help you reach jokes more easily. And so despite some minor grievances, I have nothing for respect to it to put this boss battle in A tier. So, remember Abracadabra from Donkey Kong Bonanza? The boss fight where I had to make your way through a short obstacle course in order to beat it up? Yeah, well, welcome back. Iggy Koopa in this game is basically just that, but in 2D, and probably even way more chaotic at its hardest. Admittedly, I wasn't really too excited about this fight at first for this resemblance, because while Abracadabra was definitely one of the better Bonanza bosses, that doesn't say much when virtually all of them except the last three were rather easy and mindless. However, despite this, Iggy more than makes up in all the elements you have to worry about. Of course, the base of it is that you're mostly just bouncing your way across piranha creepers at different altitudes until you can stomp on him. However, that also doesn't consider how some piranhas have their teeth aimed up and will launch themselves up to try and eat you, or how Iggy is constantly spitting seeds at you that can push you back, or even how in the last phase, even the ceiling gets filled with creepers ready to strike you. And it's just so much fun to try and swiftly make your way through this death trap. You can't even stay on solid ground and wait a little before you have a go, because even the starting position will get uprooted by a plant pretty quickly. And I love how much Iggy's piranha plant form perfectly captures his eccentric creepiness. They did my favorite Koopaling justice. I do wish his fight got a little crazier early on, since as is, it suffers a bit from starting off really easy and taking a bit of time to really build up. However, when it shines, I absolutely love it. To be honest, as insane as this might sound on a surface level, I don't think it would age too badly of me to say that Larry Koopa taking the bronze medal on my ranking might be the best thing to come out of the entire Shining Falls world of this game for me. After so many years of being restricted as the basic tutorial Koopaling character, Mario Wonder finally gives him justice with not only one of the most unique boss battles in the game, but also by far the most stellar Wonder design of them all. Seriously, look at how freaking cool he looks. They leaned fully into the already crystal-like aesthetic of this world, and it made for an incredibly engaging maze-like fight, where you not only needed to smash your way through to the crystal cube Larry goes into hiding in, but also do so while the maze is crushing in on itself, constantly reshaping the most optimal route. And it only gets even more frantic in the later phases, where bombs spawn in everywhere you need to avoid, and you don't even need to jump up using these fists as platforms ready to smash into you. And if you get struck by these lightspeed suckers, the process starts all over from the beginning again. So yeah, don't around and find out. It's such a uniquely chaotic take on a boss fight, for one of my favorite Koopalings ever, that I was ready to call it my favorite from the first playthrough. There is just one tiny oversight though. If you lose the elephant fruit at any point, and Larry's jewel black spikes both up and down, you can't really do anything and have to wait until he teleports away for round 2, which is kinda lame. It does add a risk where losing your power-up is genuinely detrimental, but when the risk is just that the fight gets prolonged, it's kinda cheap, although I'll say no more. Beyond that, it's one of the most fun boss fights without a doubt. Lemmy Koopa, the second Koopaling you fight in the game, is ironically enough also my second place favorite one of them all, and it definitely surprised me in all the best ways possible. Like Wendy, this is another one technically more simple than the rest, however unlike with her, who is still very much straightforward in execution too, Lemmy has so much hidden depth and versatility to how to approach him that makes for one of the most fun boss fights to speedrun through and get a clean run on. Already, he's got one of the hardest mid-phase attacks to avoid among all the Koopalings, where he turns into this giant spiky ball and just bounces all over like a DVD screensaver. But while the central gameplay loop of him just hopping around on a ball of towers and tossing bombs is certainly not the craziest thing on the surface, it is actually so much fun to juggle back the bombs at him to shrink his tower, and purely because hitting them back is a lot harder than it sounds. You can't just hop into them, you have to align your jump very specifically so they don't just bounce up vertically, and later when he will launch 2 bombs in one direction, it gets especially satisfying to try and hit both at once. Ideally, you're supposed to hit them all back until his tower's gone, however as long as he's just got 1 or 2 balls to balance on, you can still try to jump on him even then, as dangerous as it is with his bouncing, which adds yet another element of risk versus reward that's fun to play around with. I just love how there are so many ways around this fight, and unlike with Morton, where self-sabotaging is a lot easier, and sometimes has way graver consequences, here missing a bomb ain't no big deal since Lem is always throwing them frequently. Overall, this fight just feels so good to play, and it's an easy S-tier fight for me, and one I always look forward to. However, without a doubt, my favorite boss fight in the game was always going to be the grand leader of the Koopalings, Ludwig. Jesus Christ, what an absolute gem of a fight he got. Ludwig is not only the absolute hardest and longest boss to beat of the Koopalings, but also by far the most epic one as well by a landslide, as the very last of them. First off, his design is so freaking badass. I love how it references Lucky Thunder from the first new soup, and it just fits with him often being fought in Skyworlds as well. And the gameplay loop, so goddamn perfect. Truth be told, it is another case where, like with Iggy, it starts off somewhat lightly before it gets truly frantic, but unlike with Iggy, every phase is still amazing at the base level here. Even the mid-phase attacks where he and his clones are slowly flying past the arena and zapping the ground, since you also have to fight a grueling wind that keeps switching directions. You'd think the wind would make for an infinitely more annoying boss fight, but surprisingly, it just makes it really dynamic, since it's not strong enough to severely affect your movement, even if it still forces you to be much more mindful. Plus it just makes for an even cooler atmosphere. In general, I just think it's a super engaging fight, avoiding all the lightning strikes the Ludwigs aim at you, and finding ways to get to higher ground to nail a hit. And the last phases, after you swim up to the clouds, when the lightning strikes get even more intense, and the winds even start to fight you when you're trying to hit them, especially solidify this as one of the most dynamically badass boss fights in all of Mario. Not even just 2D. This is low-key one of my favorite Nintendo bosses ever now, and puts up a good competition with the very best of them. And while for some that might seem like hyperbole, for me there was absolutely no doubt where this legend would end up. And with that, that concludes my full ranking of all the boss fights in Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Koopalings and Bowser's core family alike. Hopefully you all enjoyed hearing my thoughts on each and every one of them, because this was a fun topic to talk about. It's honestly insane how staggering the difference in quality is between these two boss fight types. But it also makes me happy how much the developers behind this game seem to take the criticism to heart, and were able to redeem themselves, with battles so off the charts more innovative than what we had initially, that it makes you wonder how they could even flub so hard from the start. So what is your ranking of all the bosses in this game? Did you agree with me or not? Let me know in the comment section down below which Koopaling you thought was giving the best justice, and if you liked the video, hit the subscribe button and join me as I yap about everything Mario and the Nintendo related there is on this channel. And so with all that being said, I'm signing off now, until next time.